Well, for this Vaughan Williams Society interview, we go back to the United States, to California this time. I've been speaking with Byron Adams, retired professor of music at the University of California, with a distinguished record of working on the lives and music of British composers, not least Ralph Vaughan Williams. And the main subject of my conversation with Byron was his Vaughan Williams and His World, edited by him and Daniel Grimley, a product of the Bard Music Festival in upstate New York in 2023. We started off by talking about the Vaughan Williams Fellowship, which was founded 30 years ago this year, and Byron was the first beneficiary. The fellowship was underwritten by the Carthusian Trust, linked, of course, to Charterhouse School, where Vaughan Williams was educated. And Byron, first of all, explained what this fellowship money enabled him to do.
I spent 8 weeks doing research in the British Library, which in those days was in the unadulterated British Museum, which was in some ways more, I would say, fun, actually,
Yeah,
in
well,
strange ways.
Byron,
Going down Tottenham Court Road.
yeah, well, it's not the new British Library is not so bad when all said and done. So basically, the fellowship provided you with the funds to do that. That's what
Oh, yes.
what are the range of things that the fellowship actually did provide for?
Well, what it provided was a stipend. It provided room and board at Charterhouse. Out of the stipend, you were able to pay for your transportation back and forth to London, and a lot of moral support, I would say. The Carthusian Trust was really wonderful. And then there were 24 of my successors, among whom were Eric Saylor, whose biography of Vaughan Williams is masterful and just superb. And several other very fine scholars, Charles Maguire, who teaches at Oberlin College Conservatory, and Christopher Shear, who is now writing a biography of Holst, which is badly needed, I think, and a whole series of people. And many of them ended up in distinguished positions teaching in universities.
Yeah, but look,
So the scheme was a success.
what is this thing, Americans and Vaughan Williams? I mean, it goes back, a good way. What is it? Why is there such a passion for? I know other British composers as well. I know, but Vaughan Williams seems to touch a chord in America.
Yes. Well, one thing about Vaughan Williams in America is that he visited our shores 3 times. The first time, 1921 or two, should know that because I've written about it, to the Norfolk Festival, and he conducted the American premiere of the Pastoral Symphony. Then in 1932 to Bryn Mawr College, where he gave the Mary Flexner lectures. And then in 1954 to Cornell, arranged by Sir Keith Faulkner, who was on the faculty at Cornell at that time and then left Cornell to become the director of the Royal College of Music. And Vaughan Williams loved America.
Well, yeah,
And
I think that is what will intrigue people. We know that Vaughan Williams performances go back a very, very long way. But the idea that Vaughan Williams had quite such a passion for America is something that comes through in your chapter in this book. And I was fascinated by that. He really was taken by America. But what by Byron exactly? What really instilled that love of America?
Walt Whitman, first of all, he'd already come to America predisposed to like America because he had consumed and by that time written 2 large and magnificent choral works, Toward the Unknown Region and a sea symphony. And he loved Walt Whitman. He loved the history of the Civil War. He found it, I think, inspiring. He was a small d, but still a Democrat. He liked the idea of a federation of different entities, states, each with its own individual culture, which he later proposed for the Federal Union. You know, he was a member of the Federal Union, of Federated States of Europe, to end European wars. So he loved that. And then he fell in love with New York because he and Adeline, his first wife, arrived in New York and they were whisked to a lavish hotel where he had a view of the Woolworth building, which was the tallest building in New York at that time. The Chrysler building had not been built, which was then taller, and then the Empire State Building had not yet been built. So he just said, I just find it. He wrote to a friend, I find New York, you know, so incredibly beautiful. And then when he came back in the 1950s, he writes to a friend, New York is more wonderfully, tragically beautiful as ever, or something to that effect. Now, to get back to the Vaughan Williams Fellowship, that fellowship started really a train of events that led to a great deal of scholarship being produced by Americans about Vaughan Williams and about British music in general. And the first of my edited volumes, which was for Ashgate, and now I think it's Taylor and Francis, you could get it, that was all Vaughan Williams fellows. And it still sells quite well, and it's a valuable book, I think. There's certain things that I would have done differently, but it was my first edited collection. But the authors were very earnest, and they produced Rufus Hallmark's chapter on the Songs of Travel is superb and is often cited.
Yeah.
So there was an impetus, and what it led to, it was Charles McGuire and Deborah Heckert, another Vaughan Williams fellow, who wrote an excellent book on the revival of the form of the mask in the 1890s. And, you know, masks by Vaughan Williams and Holst, and a couple of other enterprising young people founded the North American British Music Studies Association, which meets every 2 years, as prizes that it gives out, as a newsletter, as reviews of books on British music, and is a most impressive concern.
Well, it's extraordinary. But look, let's look at the book in
Yes.
more breadth. I mean, humor me and explain the title to the possible reader. What does it mean? What does it mean?
What does it mean? Well, there is in Dutchess County, which is referred to by Americans as upstate New York, not New York City, but upstate New York, there is an extraordinary college, a liberal arts college. They do have some graduate programs, but it's mostly for undergraduates. And the president, for many, many years of that college, has been a man named Leon Botstein, who is a very fine conductor and an enthusiast for British music. Well, the festival, which is held in the second and third weekends of August every year, is a musical figure, say Dvorak, and his world, or her, Nadia Boulanger, and her world. So, what we have with the Bard Music Festival since 1990 is when it started, is a composer selected every year. It's not just music being performed, it's also lectures. In this way, it's really rather like the three choirs in some directions, because they put on lectures, they put on panels, there is an historical and musicological aspect. It is curated by a series of people. There is a scholar in residence, or sometimes two scholars in residence, who are involved with the programming and producing a book. Now, for many years, the book was published by Princeton University Press. And then they decided not to continue their music division in the press. So it moved to the University of Chicago Press, which both of those presses are superb. So what you have with my first involvement with the Bard Festival, the first time I went to Bard, and this is the anniversary, was 2005, shortly after my 50th birthday. And it was really shortly thereafter, just a week or so, I was flown out to do an interview with President Botstein. Then in 2007, there was Edward Elgar and His World. And that one I did alone, that book. And then in 2023, well, actually, it was earlier than that. It was 2019. President Botstein proposed Vaughan Williams and His World. Now, many people think, including many of the public at Bard, that because I'm a scholar of Vaughan Williams, that President Botstein must have been doing this as a favor to me. That is incorrect. They simply don't understand how it works. What happened was that President Botstein became more and more interested in Vaughan Williams' music. And mind you, he has conducted, for example, a sea symphony with the American Symphony Orchestra and the Bard Festival Chorus in Carnegie Hall. And during the Sibelius year, he performed very beautifully the Fifth Symphony. And then with the American Symphony Orchestra on a fascinating program about, after World War II, he started with the Vaughan Williams Sixth Symphony on the first half and in Carnegie Hall, and went without pause into Ligoti's Requiem.
Yeah.
And the end of the Vaughan Williams and the beginning of the Ligoti sounded as if it had continued.
Well, look,
it was absolutely chilling.
Byron, if somebody is thinking of buying this book and it looks attractive, of course,
Yes.
and a familiar picture of
Yes.
Vaughan cover. I mean, what are the different aspects of Vaughan Williams's world that they can expect to experience in headlines, no detail, just headlines? What coverage is there in this?
Well, we start with Cambridge and a very fine essay by my dear friend Julian Rushton, and then the Royal College, a very fine chapter by a former graduate student of mine who has written a biography of Elizabeth McConkey, who I think was one of Vaughan Williams' finest pupils. I did Vaughan Williams in America. Dan Grimley and Sarah Collins talk about land management, which doesn't sound that interesting, but in fact it is. You have documents. We found documents that had never been published, and there it is. We have reviews that have never been published. We have a superb documents chapter by Eric Saylor. We have a fascinating exploration of Job. In other words, we run the gamut.
Yeah, but what comes through to me, we were talking about Vaughan Williams and his world. I mean, virtually every chapter, whatever the sort of meat of it is, constantly you are inhabiting the
The
period.
world,
The,
yes.
I mean, there are all sorts of insights into the times that we're talking about. It's not just a purely academic analysis.
No, no, no. Well, Vaughan Williams, he was a protean figure. This is not generally known. I mean, it's not just Uncle Rafe. It's someone who is politically enough engaged to help Jews escape Germany, to help kinder transport children, to support the idea of a federated Europe. Someone whose close friend was the philosopher George Moore, yet another Order of Merit friend of Vaughan Williams. And I think that one of the golden things is Leon Botstein's final chapter, which he talks about Vaughan Williams and the philosophers that Vaughan Williams knew, Moore, Bertrand Russell, but that he ends with when Dan Grimley and I got Leon Botstein's chapter and we read it because he said, please look at this. I do not want to fall into error. Fall into error. The end of it is this brilliant juxtaposition and comparison of J.R.R. Tolkien and Vaughan Williams and their experience as veterans in the First World War and their differing worldviews and their similarities. And literally, as I was reading it, I had to get up and I must say, I mixed myself a cocktail because I just thought this is the most perfect and important thing. So it's Vaughan Williams not just as a great composer, which he most certainly was, but also as, in a way, what we in America called a public intellectual.
Yeah, of course. One thing that anybody connected to the Vaughan Williams Society in a serious way will latch onto is the chapter on Michael Kennedy, who was such a towering figure in writing about British music, but was deeply associated with the society for many years until his death in 2014. It's a chapter which focuses on a selection of letters in his archive. Perhaps you could explain to us what actually happened after he died. How did this material become available?
Well, his widow, Joyce, who was a neurosurgeon or a neurologist, she was a most delightful lady. Uh, well, it was actually while he was alive, if you want to know the truth, that the handwritten longhand manuscripts of several of his books, including his Vaughan Williams book, was donated to the John Rylands Library in Manchester. And I had heard tell, a rumor had been whispered to me that there were letters. So I was going on another research trip and I was going through Manchester. So I got off the train. It was a morning train. And I went to the John Rylands Library where they were very accommodating. And I saw the Kennedy work survey of the music of Vaughan Williams and the catalog. And I have to tell you that book on Vaughan Williams, the big thick one, he wrote it out in longhand. There were hardly any corrections, which is pretty impressive. But then at one point, one of the nice assistants at the John Rylands Library said, well, and I'm not going to attempt the Mancunian dialect, but he said, we've got these two boxes, these shoe boxes. And they were actually rather damp. I mean, the boxes and I opened them, and they were the letters that Michael had solicited from, say, Bertrand Russell, from Benjamin Britten, from a whole host of people who had known Vaughan Williams very well. Imogen Holst, as I think, is in there. So when Dan and I were talking about the documents chapter, and he's wondering, well, what documents chapter can I do? Here I am, you know. I said, go to John Ryland's library. You know about this, and look at those letters. And why don't we make a selection? We can together contextualize them. But in American detective stories, or Sherlock Holmes, although, I mean, Dan is a lot smarter than Watson ever was, but he was the Watson. He was what we call in American detective stories the leg man who went there and photographed and transcribed, and the John Ryland's library gave us wonderful permission. And so these are marvelous, and it allowed us to pay homage to Michael's career.
Oh, very, very wonderful. And let's hope that archive is being used to the full. It's nice to be able to have this opportunity to actually promote it. So thank you very much for that. But look, we've got to draw to a close. But as we're speaking, news has come through in recent days of the death of a very close friend of yours, Diana McVey, who's well known to anybody that knows about writing about British music. But she was a very good friend of yours.
Yes. Well, I will say that Diana, who was in her, I think, 80s at that point, came to Elgar in his world and gave a pre-concert talk. And it was the only pre-concert talk at which, in the history of the Bar Music Festival, there was a standing ovation.
We know Diana particularly. I suppose most people will think of her immediately as the biographer of Gerald Finzi, but she did actually know Vaughan Williams, didn't she? Is that right? Yes,
that is correct. She also wrote a very fine biography of Elgar, the first modern biography in 1955, the year of my birth, and I'm now 70. But here's about Diana. First of all, I would like to say that a video interview that I did with Diana for the Bard Festival in 2023 is on YouTube. And if you want to get a taste of who she was, she lived to be 98. She finished the edition of the collected Finzi letters, a complex task. It's about that big. When she was in her 90s, she wrote what I consider the definitive biography of Finzi, whom she knew, and she knew Vaughan Williams. And she knew Ursula Vaughan Williams very well. And she talks about this. And on that, she says, well, you know, I was kissed by Vaughan Williams. And the circumstance of that is that she'd gone to one of those singeries at Christmas. And she happened to be standing on the mistletoe. And of course, Uncle Rafe loved kissing charming young women. And so he did. She said it was quite innocent, but you ought to hear her talk about that. So Diana was this extraordinary scholar. When someone like that leaves this realm for the world to which we will all go, we lose a great deal of tradition, history, and particular knowledge.
Yeah.
So I'm mourning Diana. And I would strongly suggest that the members of the Vaughan Williams Society look at that to get an idea of this marvelous woman. She was also kissed innocently by Sir Alexander Fleming. Her husband was a doctor. I know, pretty good.
Well, how did she weigh those two up? I wonder. If you had to choose between being kissed by Alexander Fleming and Ralph Vaughan Williams, which would you choose?
Well, I mean, what I never asked of that, but of course, I think most musical women, which she was very much so. She knew Howells also, was at the Royal College, but most musical women would have plumped Vaughan Williams. Yeah. Who was, very, very, and very flirtatious, I'm glad to say.
Indeed, absolutely. Well, look, Byron, we could go on forever, and we'd love
Yes.
to gut this wonderful book for much, much more detail. We hope that sales will be rocketing upwards, even more than they have been after this interview goes live. Thank you so much for your time. Perhaps we'll talk to you again in due course as matters arise. But thank you for that, and all the very, very best to you. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you for being such a well-prepared and excellent interlocutor. I've enjoyed this vastly.
Well.
So I wish you farewell, and I wish the members of the Vaughan Williams Society farewell.